became a poor child of God. He was walking along the road, and I still tell me where are you going? He told me. Said I'm going way down to Yasgur's Farm, gonna join it in rock and roll band. Got to get back to the land, set my soul free. We are stardust, we are dust, we are building your own garden, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden. Where they cannot walk beside you, I have come to lose and small, and I feel myself to be a call to something turning. Maybe it's the time of year, yes, and maybe it's the time of year, and I don't know what life is for burning. We are stardust, we are dust, we are building your own garden, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden. We are stardust, we are dust, we are building your own garden, and we got to get ourselves back to the garden. By the time we got to Woodstock, we were heavenly strong, and everywhere was a sound and a celebration. And I dreamed I saw above the death flames riding shotgun in the sky, turning into butterflies above our nation. We are stars, we are dust, we are caught in the devil's fire.
All right, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the school hymn. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Hunter Fair has this morning's devotion.
This morning, the reading comes from Philippians 2, verses 3 through 4. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. In these verses, Paul is discussing the way that we are to treat one another. True community is built on humility and selflessness, where we are all looking out for one another. We can look to Jesus as a perfect example of humility and selflessness in the way that he cares for us. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, I pray that you would shape our hearts to reflect this truth in our daily lives. Help us to set aside our own desires and seek the good of those around us. Let our actions and words reflect your kindness. As we approach the final stretch, please bless our weeks ahead and our break coming up, and we ask for your strength, wisdom, and perseverance to finish out strong. In your name, amen. Mr. Smythe will introduce this morning's chapel.
Good morning. Can computers have minds? Will Darwinian processes in computer science ever generate biological information? Will Elon Musk and XAI and our Skynet-worthy Colossus supercomputer eventually destroy us all, beginning right here in the Bluff City? Our guest today, Dr. Richard Marks, is widely skeptical of the doomsday scenario, quoted as saying, computers are no more able to create information than iPods are capable of creating music. His law of conservation of information purports to demonstrate inherent limitations on natural selection, suggesting that the intricate information needed for life requires an intelligent source. And therefore computers, artificial intelligence, large language models also require an external intelligent source. Back to Dr. Marks in a minute. As we discuss in our comparative religion, comparative philosophy class with the seniors, this will be a bit review, boys, but we only have two choices. The first choice, relatively popular today in the academy, is called scientific materialism, arguably the leading scientific theory and explanation of our reality today. And it comes with some stark presuppositions and some stark conclusions. There's no purpose. There's no design behind nature. It's all a blind machine formed by chemical interactions, and we therefore are inescapably the byproducts of the same thing. We're merely insignificant chemical cogs within. We and our choices, they just have no meaning because there is no meaning. It's only nuclear space waste, a chemical romance of our electromagnetic fever dream, destined to extinction in the inevitable death of the solar system. Now, it's true. We labor within the solar system as stardust, as Crosby, Stills, Nash just sang. We are 65% oxygen. We are 18.55% carbon. We are 9.5% hydrogen. We are 2.6% nitrogen. We are 1.3% calcium. You throw in some phosphorus, some sulfur, some potassium, some sodium, a dash of chlorine, and there we are. Materially, that's us. Our studies in biology and chemistry prove this without a doubt, but is that all that we are? How would we know if we were otherwise? Well, welcome to the second choice. As Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young sing, we are stardust. We are golden. We are billion-year-old carbon. Mr. Askew sang the lyrics. And we've got to get ourselves back to the garden. Teleology, option number 2. A purpose, a design behind nature. The fact that we can think, that we can feel, that we can reason, that our anger is vindicated, that our deepest longings expose both our true origins and our most idealized destinations. We sense justice and injustice. We love, we hate, we dream. We build for our posterity in the hope that our labors really mean something lasting, that we sense eternity both in ourselves and inside one another. These concepts are the greatest challenges to scientific materialism. Either they mean nothing or they mean everything. Justin Brierley, a book I ran into not too long ago, The Surprising Rebirth of the Belief in God. His podcast is entitled Unbelievable, where he interviews some of the most brilliant atheistic minds in the world. In 2003, he wrote this book. He has this good quotation. While the philosophical questions around consciousness may seem complex, the actual experience of it is not. There are conscious beings The fact that we are conscious beings is one of the most obvious things that we can ever know. Yet it is an aspect of our experience that resolutely refutes to fit into the box of atheistic scientific materialism. Perhaps the evidence for God is quite literally staring at us in the face. The annual Robert Metcalf Symposium, established in 1998, is now in its 26th year, where we talk about stuff like this. It's sponsored by father of our senior Palmer Halliday, Bubba Halliday, alumnus, class of 1982, and myself, class of 1985. We try to feature leading authorities of the great ethical traditions of the West in arts and sciences and biology and literature and history and theology. Today, computer science and engineering. And we want to do that consistent with the school's Christian tradition. Today we're going to talk about some ideas of transhumanism, some ideas of artificial intelligence, its limitations, and the rational argument for a divine mind behind our human story, where perhaps the evidence of God is quite literally staring at us in the face. Enter Dr. Robert Marks, distinguished professor of electrical and computer science at Baylor University. He's a native of West Virginia who moved to Rose-Hulman to get his undergraduate degree, followed by 20 years at the University of Washington in Seattle, followed by 20 years at Baylor University in Waco. The man has been around. He is the founder of the field of computational intelligence, comprising things like fuzzy sets and neural networks and evolutionary computing. BestSchools.org named him the 50 most influential scientist in the world today, not too long ago. That's a heavy hitter. Here's some of his books. Minding the Brain, Models of the Mind, Information and Empirical Science. Non-Computable You, What You Do That Artificial Intelligence Never Will. Neural Smithing, Supervised Learning in a Feed-Forward Artificial Neural Networks. Handbook of Fourier Analysis and Its Applications. Introduction to Evolutionary Informatics. For a Great Purpose, The Case for Killer Robots. And the Introduction to Shannon Sampling and Interpolation Theory. Some light reading. Marks is the recipient of the NASA Brief Award, and he's consulted for Microsoft and Boeing and DARPA. That's the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Things like Space Force. He's a Christian, sponsors Christian World and Life View campus ministry at Baylor. He's intent on the understanding of the teleology of nature. Again, that's some purpose, that's some meaning behind the material world. He founded the Evolutionary Informatics Lab, which publishes peer-reviewed scientific papers supporting the controversial theory of intelligent design. Listed by super scholars in the 20 most influential Christian scholars in the world, those who have profoundly influenced the world by advancing Christian belief, by reconceptualizing it, and even by fundamentally challenging it, causing deep impact within Western culture's self-understanding. I'm intrigued that Dr. Marks inaugurated his Evolutionary Informatics Lab. It's a website dedicated to simulating the evolutionary process. The lab has demonstrated severe constraints on the creative potential of Darwinian-style algorithms. It's not kid stuff. But at the end of the day, he will arguably be best remembered for his earlier role as a disc jockey who wooed his wife of now over 40 years with our own Charlie Rich and his inescapable love ballad, The Most Beautiful Girl. Later advancing his disc skills with the Texas tractor pull circuit. Welcome to MUS, Dr. Richard Marks. We're in for the full pull.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, good. You know, my wife was going to join me here, but she couldn't make it. So I want to get a picture of you guys just to show that that I was here. Is that okay? Okay, good. I can't fit you all in. Wow. This is really good. Okay, I understand there's going to be pictures taken, so I'll get some of those. Having camera problems, first world problems here. Okay, everybody smile. Okay, good. Now I'm going to see if I can take a selfie. Where am I? Oh, you know what? I put on the reverse camera. I forgot that. Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. Okay, everybody wave to my wife, Monica. Okay, thank you. I tell you, it's really refreshing. Thanks. Yeah, she's getting over this cold that is going around. I tell you, guys, it's really refreshing to see everybody in a suit and tie. I told Clay when I came here, when I started teaching, we went and we taught in the classroom in a suit and tie. And it was an expression of respect for our students. That's why you dress up this way, is to show a degree of respect for your colleagues and the people you interact with. And it's so nice to see all of you guys doing that, because I know that you are giving this degree of respect to everybody. So God bless you. And I don't own the tie. Where did it go? I think it went with Microsoft. I think some of the scientists in Seattle thought they were so cool. They said, I don't need to wear a tie. I'm so cool. You gotta like me for just who I am. And they stopped wearing ties. And I think that started something called the grunge movement, which actually kind of de-emphasized the idea of dressing up as a show of respect for your colleagues. So anyway, yeah, God bless you for doing that. I'm going to go buy a tie now. You've inspired me. So my talk today is going to be on the mind-body problem. I gave a talk yesterday on this book called Non-Computable You, which basically shows the limitations of artificial intelligence and shows that artificial intelligence will never understand what it does. It'll never be creative. Clearly, it'll never experience the emotions we have, like love, compassion, and empathy, and such as that. And I think that they taped this, and I don't know if this is going to be available. So if you're interested in that aspect of it, why you are non-computable, this is the book you want to get. So I'm going to talk about another book today, and this is called Minding the Brain. This is a book that I co-edited with a couple of philosophers, and I'm an engineer, and philosophers are strange people to talk to, I've found out, but they really know their stuff, and so I learned a lot. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more. So the mind-body question. Let me start out with what I think is just a great joke by the greatest comedian alive, Emo Phillips. Anybody listen to Emo Phillips? He's hilarious, isn't he? He's weird, but he's hilarious. He said, I used to think that the brain was the most wonderful organ in my body. Then I realized who was telling me this. Now, this is funny, but it's also funny in a manner that supports what I'm going to talk about here today. By the way, what's my end time?
Oh, when they start falling asleep.
Okay.
You got about 30 minutes.
About 30 minutes, okay. But anyway, what this is realized, this is that Emo Phillips had a mind which was able to think about his brain. The implication is that the mind is greater than the brain. And this is basically the mind-body problem that we have. And so the question that we're going to ask today is, who are you? Are you a computer made out of meat? If you're a materialist, if you're a naturalist, you have to believe that we are a computer made out of meat. Many of the people that talk about artificial intelligence is what's going to happen to artificial intelligence believe they're materialists, they're naturalists. They believe that you are a computer made out of meat. And therefore, everything you do is algorithmic, can be defined by a computer program, and therefore will be able to program artificial intelligence to not only reach the singularity, which is where we're on par with everybody, where AI is on par with human beings, but actually develop a super intelligence. Well, this is certainly contrary to the conclusions that I made, and I think there's solid scientific conclusions that indeed there are things computers can't do. One of the things that they can't do is be creative. In order for AI to generate better AI, the AI has to be creative. And there is no evidence of any computer program being creative. Now, you have to define creativity, but we defined that yesterday. So are we a computer made out of meat, or are we a creation beyond the material, beyond the algorithmic, inexplicable and unknowable? Now, unknowable is a pretty powerful word, because how do you know if something is unknowable? Believe it or not, we have things in mathematics that we know are unknowable. There is this wonderful constant, I could give a whole lecture on this, called Chaitin's constant, and if you knew this one constant associated with your computer, you could solve all of these open problems, some of which have million-dollar prizes in mathematics. But you can prove that Chaitin's number exists, but you can also prove that it's unknowable. So there are things which are provably unknowable. So there might be things in our life that we're looking for that might never have an explanation. So this is the book, Minding the Brain. Is your mind the same thing as your brain, or are there aspects of the mind beyond the brain's biology? This is a problem which is very old. It goes back to Descartes. We were talking about Descartes' work in this, and he actually talked about the mind as the soul. Is the soul greater than the brain? And this is an edited book, and we got, I'm very proud of this, we got a number of people from different fields in order to address the mind-body problem from different aspects, from different dimensions. We have J.P. Moreland, a philosopher, and we have a neurosurgeon, a mathematician, biologist, computer scientist, and they all address this from the perspective of their specialties. And so therefore I'm very, very proud of this book. So unfortunately we don't have time to go through all of the nuances of the book, but I'm going to touch on some things relatively quickly. We're going to touch on consciousness. What is consciousness? How would you define consciousness? I tell people I'm pretty sure I'm conscious. I'm not sure about you. Right? You just don't know what consciousness is. It's a very hard thing to define. It's hard to get your mind around it, but people have tried to do that, and they've approached it from their philosophy. They've approached it either as a naturalist or materialistic, or they have actually thought that, well, maybe there's something beyond the materialism, and maybe the mind is something beyond the material. We'll talk about neuroscience and some of the evidence that the mind is greater than the body. In fact, in the last number of decades, there has been an accumulation of scientific evidence that the mind is indeed greater than the brain. And we'll talk about that in terms of neuroscience, the idea of abstract thought, and then a really fascinating area, which is near-death experiences. I'm sure that many of you have heard about that. So let's talk very quickly about consciousness theories. Here are the theories of consciousness, and all of them except the blue, except the yellow one at the bottom is basically from an idea of materialism, that the consciousness must exist from our material world. There's panpsychism. Anybody heard of panpsychism? Okay, a couple of people. Panpsychism is the belief that everything is conscious. Just like when God created matter and energy, everything has a mass, everything has a energy associated with it. Well, you know, when in the creation of the world, everything has a consciousness. My coffee cup is conscious to a degree, according to this theory. And we're just lucky that we've accumulated it all. I think it's really weird stuff. There's the idea of emergence. And I think the people in artificial intelligence believe that as computers become more and more complex, that there will be an emergence of consciousness, that all of a sudden that this very complex thing is going to develop a consciousness. And I just wrote an article with Michael Ignor, a neurosurgeon I'll introduce next, about integrated information theory, which is one of these areas, and one of these theories. And there's absolutely no evidence for it at all. There's Sims theory. This was something that Elon Musk talked about 20 years ago. I don't know if he still subscribes to it, but he thinks that we are simulations and that we are running around as a simulation in a computer game that's been developed by somebody else. Believe it or not, there is also a theory called idealism, which believes that, in a sense, that our consciousness and we are thoughts of God. So there's kind of a similarity there. There's quantum consciousness. This was put forth by Roger Penrose, a Nobel laureate, who thought, you know, there's things which cannot be explained by the materialist, the algorithmic, so therefore there must be something else which happened. What is non-algorithmic? Well, quantum collapse is non-algorithmic. So he said this must be the source of our consciousness. And indeed, this has been floating around for 20 years, and there's been no traction on it. It's a very interesting theory, though. And then there's the mind-brain dualism, which is this describes a number of different areas that talk about the fact that the mind is greater than the body, that the mind is greater than the brain. So I have learned a lot from this guy. Again, we just co-authored a paper on integrated information theory, which is really a silly argument, which is dominating the theory of consciousness. And it has, I don't know, there's no substance to it. He wrote a book. This is going to be released in June called The Immortal Mind. And Michael Ignor is a brain surgeon. He goes in and he cuts on people's brains. Wow. We had an appointment one time, and I got an email. He says, I can't meet with you. I know it's an important meeting, but I have an emergency brain surgery I have to go to. And I wrote him back and I said, Michael, where's your priorities? Yeah, well, his priority was on operating in the brain. So let's talk about some of the things that Michael talks about in terms of neuroscience. Let's talk about Wilder Penfield. He did some incredible work. He was a neurosurgeon. And one of the things he did is he wanted to see where the signals in the brain came from that controlled our motor response. And so during open brain operation, and by the way, many operations are done with the patient conscious, but with the brain exposed. It turns out there's no nerves in the brain, so you can't feel anything. And Penfield said, I tell you what, patient, what I want you to do is every once in a while, I want you to wiggle your finger. Just decide when you wiggle your finger. And then he touched a part of the brain, and it was a part of the brain which made your fingers wiggle. And he went through and he touched a part of the brain, and the fingers wiggled. And then the guy thought, well, I should move my fingers, so he wiggled. Both of these had the same neural response, but their sources were very different. And what was the source? Well, the source remains a mystery. The source could be this externally applied touching of the brain, or it could be externally. So I thought that was very interesting, because where do these thoughts, where do these controls come from? There was Benjamin Libet. He was a Nobel laureate, and he did interesting work, and you'll be surprised to hear this. But he found out that there was a little, you think you have free will, right? Well, there's a little signal in the brain that tells you what you want to do, and then, a few tenths of a second later, you know what you want to do. So your brain has a signal that says, I want to tap my foot. And then in a few milliseconds, you think, well, I want to tap my foot. So there's a delay in the communication between what happens in the brain and what you actually do. Isn't that interesting? So that kind of goes against the idea of free will, that maybe all of this stuff originates in the brain somewhere. And but then he found out something very interesting. He found out that we can have this inclination which comes from our brain, and we can exercise what he called free won't, not free will. But we can look at these inclinations that are born in the brain, and we can say no, I'm not going to do that. And I relate to this because I used to smoke cigarettes, okay? And all the time I had these little inclinations. Bob, you want a cigarette? So I smoked a cigarette. Bob, you want a cigarette? So I had a cigarette. So my wife says, we're not going to have kids until you quit smoking. So I said, okay, I'll quit smoking. So all of a sudden I said, Bob, you want a cigarette? And I said, no, I exercised free won't, even though my brain was telling me my inclination to do something. So according to Penfield, this is very interesting. Because we do have free won't. Michael Ignor says that there is a place in the brain which has this previous inclination to let you do something, but there's no place in the brain that actually shows the exercise of free won't. Where does that come from? Absence of evidence does not mean evidence of absence. So it could be that there's something, but they haven't discovered it yet. Then one of the most compelling results is through another Nobel laureate, Roger Sperry. He did something called a corpus callosotomy. That's where the surgeon goes in and takes your brain and cuts it into two pieces. So they go right down between the two hemispheres, and they take the equivalent of a knife, and they separate your left brain hemisphere from your right brain hemisphere. I wouldn't want to go through that operation, would you? But why would they ever do that? Why would they ever have a corpus callosotomy? The reason is because they found out in people that had seizures, that a little signal from one side of the brain was communicated to the other side of the brain, and the signal over here says, have a seizure, and it communicated to the other part of the brain. So by cutting the brain in two, they found out that this communication path was disrupted. I don't know who the first person was that had a corpus callosotomy, but I tell you, that's really interesting. But if your mind is associated with your brain after a corpus callosotomy, you have basically two brains, don't you? So do you have two minds? The answer is no. And in fact, Michael Ignore performs these operations at Stony Brook, where he's the head of pediatric surgery. And what they found out is if you do this corpus callosotomy, that no, you don't emerge as two people. Now, you do have psychological challenges, but you emerge from that corpus callosotomy the same person you went into, the same person before the corpus callosotomy. So therefore, it's very strange that even though you have the equivalent of two brains now, you only have one mind, one sense of purpose. So that is something interesting. Another thing about seizures, this is again from Wilder Penfield. He was big on seizures, and he noticed that when people have seizures, they did all sorts of things. Here's a list of them. They had hallucinations, they had fear, anxiety, panic, euphoria, feelings of ecstasy, involuntary moment, paralysis, and impaired ability to speak or understand language. So this is from observing many people who had seizures. But you know what he found out? Something just fascinating. There was no instantiation of something he called abstract thought. There was no abstract thought, which was the product of a seizure. Now, what is an abstract thought? This is Wilder Penfield who first observed this. It refers to the ability to think about concepts and ideas that are not tied to concrete objects or specific experiences. They are abstract. Let me give you an example here. Something which is not an abstract thought are the existence of 8 eggs. Because 8 eggs are eventually going to decay. They're going to turn into something else. They're not going to be here forever. They're not abstract. They're concrete. Yet, fascinatingly, the number 8 is an abstract thought. The number 8 will never disappear. We could all die in here, and the number 8 would still survive. Mathematicians are never going to go forward and say, today we lost the number 8. We have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10. 8 is gone. No, 8 is an abstract thought, and it really doesn't exist. This was codified, interestingly, by another Nobel laureate called Eugene Wigner. And he said there's an unreasonableness about the relationship of mathematics to reality. And if you think about this, all of the mathematics, why does it have anything to do with reality? Well, it turns out the birth of modern science occurred in Western Europe because of Christianity. And the reason it occurred in Western Europe because of Christianity, they believed that God had given laws in order for us to live, the 10 Commandments, so maybe he put laws within his creation. So this is the motivation behind people like Newton and Pascal and a number of other people to do things. But if you think about it, why does reality have anything to do with mathematics? In fact, all of mathematics is abstract thought. So during my day job, by the way, I do have a day job. And by the way, for the seniors, I passed out some Baylor propaganda. So if you're thinking about going to Baylor, that's fine. Baylor is a great university. All of the faculty in my department, electrical and computer engineering, are Christians, and it's just a wonderful place to go. It's a really classy place to go to. And what do I do when I come here and talk to you and I have a class scheduled? What do you think I do? I give a test. And this is the solutions to a test I just gave yesterday that I passed out to the students. I do it on an iPad and then send it out. These are little squiggles, but these squiggles invoke the concept of abstract thought. All mathematics is abstract. It doesn't physically exist. Clay took me to see the Probash shop, and that's a pyramid. And guess what? Someday that's going to decay, just like the pyramids in Egypt and Mexico. Someday it's going to go away. But something which doesn't go away in geometry is the triangle. We all have a concept in our minds what a triangle is, and it's an abstract thought. I mean, even simplified that, a straight line, zero width, finite length. That doesn't exist in reality. You cannot draw a straight line. If you try to draw a line that's going to have finite width, right, and it's going to have a length, but there is no ideal line that exists. It is a concept which is abstract. So here is the bottom line. We have the ability, you and I are going to be, we're going to be a pile of ashes or a pile of dirt someday, right? We're going to decompose, just like those 8 eggs did. Yet, interestingly, we have the ability of thinking about abstract thoughts. We can hold these abstract thoughts which will live forever in our brains. And so one of the chapters in Minding the Brain makes a very deep case that if we have the ability for abstract thoughts, we ourselves must have an abstract component to us. In order to understand abstract thoughts, you have to have an abstract thought, you have to have an abstraction associated with you. And that abstraction never dies. So therefore, just like the triangle, the number 8, mathematics, the circle, the abstraction part of us will live on. It's a great model for living for a long time. So the bottom line for this section, and again, if you want more in depth, Minding the Brain is a good place to go. If you can grasp abstract thoughts, part of you must be abstract. Therefore, abstract concepts are forever, and you will be too. The abstract part of you will continue to exist. So let me go on, and let's talk about near-death experiences. This is something which has really taken over in the last few decades, and the reason is because of the advancements in medicine. We are now able to revive people who have been dead for a long time. What's a near-death experience? That's when a person is brain dead, their body dead, and they're brain dead and body dead for a long time, and they come back and they say, I had this incredible experience, which is called a near-death experience. And they come back changed people. And it's just astonishing to read some of these. Now, when I first heard of near-death experiences, I thought, this is kind of crazy, especially having people die meeting Jesus and stuff. And I thought, well, they're just going to try to help Jesus out, and Jesus doesn't need any help. But it turns out that there's so many of these stories. There's hundreds, there's thousands, and we'll get into the medical research into near-death experiences just in a minute. They're just fascinating. But near-death experiences are something where people have just these astonishing results. And here's how they describe it. They describe it as, first of all, being beyond description. Imagine if you came across, there's a great H.G. Wells short story called Country of the Blind. Everybody there is blind in this country for generations. And this sighted person comes in and he tries to explain to them what seeing is about. How would you do that? It's beyond their comprehension. They've never seen anything. How do you communicate this idea of seeing? The people that have near-death experiences come back, and a very, very common characteristic is that what they have experienced is beyond their ability to explain it in terms of what we experience in daily life. It's a clear reality. It isn't a dream. I don't know about you, but I have a dream, and I wake up, and I say, that's a cool dream. And then 10 seconds later, I'm brushing my teeth, and I said, I had a dream. Oh, what was that dream? It just kind of floats away. Have you ever had that, where dreams just kind of go away? No, this was a real experience. They believed that it was a real experience. There was a sensory explosion. There was a sense typically of unspeakable joy, unconditional love, timelessness, life review. Yes, there were cases where your life flashed beyond your eyes. One guy came back and he said, I'm mad. He said, what's the matter? I said, well, I had a life review, and they didn't talk about all the awards that I won at work. Apparently in his life review, all the awards that he won at work weren't important, and they talk more about their relationship aspects in the life review. Meeting deceased loved ones, and Michael Ignore points out that nobody in a death experience has ever met anybody in their near-death experience that's still alive. They are dead. There's a hesitation to return. A lot of people have near-death experiences, and they don't want to come back. They don't want to come back. So I'm going to give you two aspects of this near-death experience. First, from a Christian point of view. I'm a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ since I was about your age, a junior in college, where I became a Christian. And there's just this fascinating case for near-death experiences. I have a friend named Walter Bradley, the former chair of the Mechanical Engineering Department at Texas A&M, who loves to talk about near-death experiences and helped this guy, John Burke, write the book Imagine Heaven. This is from a Christian point of view. And one of the things that Burke talks about is, he says, you know, the Apostle Paul might have had a near-death experience. Wow, that's kind of cool. It's in the Bible? Well, in Acts it says, but the Jews came from Antioch and, how do you say that? Iconium? It sounds like an element. Okay? And having persuaded the crowds, they stoned Paul and dragged him out of the city, supposing he was dead. But when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and entered into the city, and on the next day he went on with Barnabas to Derbe. So this is in Acts 14. Paul wrote about this experience later in 2 Corinthians. He says, I know a man in Christ, and he was talking about himself, who 14 years ago was caught up into third heaven, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know. God knows, and I know that this man was caught up into paradise, whether in body or out of body, I do not know. God knows, and he heard things that cannot be told, which man may not utter. So in other words, he came back and he said, I just can't explain what I saw, very consistent with the near-death experiences that other people have seen. So you hear about near-death experiences, but I want to play for you in our final minutes together some testimonies of people that have experienced near-death experiences. And you can hear that there's no doubt in their mind with their interviews. The first guy was a pilot. And he was a pilot that crashed his plane into the equivalent of a cliff, a rock cliff. Is the time over? Okay. Okay, you can keep on going. And he was a Christian. And during his near-death experience, he called himself roadkill. During his experience, he had this encounter. And by the way, there's two modes of encounter. One is kind of an out-of-body experience where you kind of float around the operating room. We had one lady that said she came back after being out, and she said, yeah, I know you were the doctor, and you weren't wearing spats. You're supposed to wear spats when you're in the operating room. And she said, and you have a dirty mouth. So she had listened to all of the conversations in an out-of-body experience. There's also the idea of what Walter Bradley calls the front porch of heaven. Now, this guy was pre-conditioned to have a Christian experience. So let's play the pilot audio, if you will.
And as soon as I'm thinking, go back, the angel moved just to the side. But I looked into the eyes of the warmest, kindness, most wonderful. I knew this was the Son of God. I knew this was my Savior. And all of a sudden my knees buckled, my legs lost their strength, and I just went down. I couldn't stand. I was not worthy to stand in His presence. Funny that I didn't feel worthy to be in heaven, yet I knew I was worthy in the early part. I was somehow granted this authority, but I had this supernatural gift that I was worthy. Somebody had done something for me. And so I'm down on just falling down, and I see His feet, and I grab them, and I hold His feet, and I see the scars. And I know this is the Son of God. He's my Savior. He's my Lord. It is because of Him. He died for everybody. It's so cool because the Bible even says, no, I take that back. Jesus said that I have come not to condemn the world, but that the world through me will be saved. And it was because of that. He's not condemning anybody. It doesn't matter what you've done in your life, what sins you've done, including murder. It doesn't matter what you've done. All of it is forgivable. God can forgive anybody of anything. And then we have this free gift that we call salvation. You and I know about.
And that's what you felt at His feet.
Now, that's pretty powerful. You believe that he experienced this? Absolutely. You might say, well, this guy had a predisposition to Christianity. What about somebody who was a Hindu or a Muslim or something? If they had a near-death experience, would they see Muhammad? Would they see one of the Hindu gods? There is indeed evidence of that. In fact, one guy came back and he said, he was an atheist. He said, yeah, I saw this guy with a long white beard. I think it was Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. So there is this sort of thing. Now, the next clip is about 4 minutes. Do we have time for that? Okay. So here's the interesting aspect. If you can go to heaven, you can also, whoops. If you can go to heaven, you can also go to hell. It turns out that a lot of people that are having a hellion experience don't remember it. Anesthesiologists talk about guys that come back and they say, don't let me die, don't let me die. Keep me, and then they would fall back into a brain-dead, body-dead state. And they would do this repeatedly during the operation. When they woke up, they asked the guy, what was going on? And they forget. They don't remember the experience. It was so terrible that they just blocked it out of their minds. That's not always the case. I want to play you now a clip from a professor of art. So this is a university professor that was award-winning, and he was an atheist, and how his experience went in the near-death experiences. So could you play the second video, please? It's a little longer.
I had known from some time in that afternoon that I was dying. I knew absolutely, but I didn't want to die because I was an atheist, and I knew that I was terrified of it because dying means the end of everything. I was a 38-year-old college professor. My work was shown in some museums. I'd won some prizes. I had a wife and 2 kids, and a career. And one of the thoughts that kept going through: how could this happen? How can this possibly happen? It's not supposed to happen. And I felt wonderful, unlike I'd ever felt in my entire life.
You feel
I feel
good?
more alive than I've ever felt in my entire life. And I heard people calling me in English, kind of nicely, Howard, come here. So I go over to the doorway of the room, and in the hallway is gray. It's very unclear, like a terrible black and white TV picture. As we went, it got darker and darker, and they came in closer and closer, and more of them were around me. And now, as I asked them questions like, where are we going, how much further, things like that, they started to become more rude and say things to me like, shut up, don't ask questions, you'll find out, you don't need to know, keep moving, move it, like that. And I'm like, getting pretty intimidated. That becomes fear. That becomes terror. And what they were doing was just playing with me, toying with me. And at first it was pushing, kicking, pulling, hitting. And then that became biting and tearing with their fingernails and hands. And they were taking pieces of me. And then they became more invasive. And in that place, I heard a voice which I identify as my voice, except that it did not come out of my throat, off my lips. But I do feel, it's strange, but I feel like it came out of my chest. This voice said, pray to God. And I thought, I don't believe in God. I don't pray. The voice said, pray to God. And I thought, I don't even know how to pray. I couldn't pray if I wanted to pray. The voice said, pray to God.
But you couldn't find one at that point?
I found the Lord as my shepherd. And then I found, yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I'll fear no evil. Stuff like that. And our Father who art in heaven. I remember like these phrases out of prayers. This is the horrible part. That the people that had met me were my kindred spirit. They denied God. They lived for themselves, and their lives were about manipulation and control of other people. In that, this memory comes of myself as a little boy sitting in a Sunday school classroom singing, Jesus Loves Me. Why would he care? He must hate me. I'm so sorry. And I thought, enough of this. I'm done. I don't have anything else. Jesus, please save me. And when I said that, I saw light, tiny little speck of light, and it very rapidly got very bright and came over me. And I saw out of the light hands and arms emerge out of this impossibly beautiful white light. Much more significantly to me than was the physical healing was that I was experiencing a love that is beyond, far beyond words. I've never been able to articulate it, but I can say that if I took all my experience of love in my entire life and could condense it into a moment, it still wouldn't begin to measure up to the intensity of this love that I was feeling.
So pretty powerful emotional stuff of a guy that was on his way to hell. So there's been a number of books written about near-death experiences. I'm going to skip really quickly through here. By the way, you want to know what Jesus looks like? That's what he looks like. If you want to find out more, there's these breakout sessions afterwards, and we can talk about it then. Where did this picture of Jesus came from? Now, what I've presented is kind of from a Christian point of view. If you want a secular point of view, get the book After by Bruce Grayson. He's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist. He spent his life studying near-death experience. He founded the first journal dedicated to near-death experiences. He sponsored the first conference associated with near-death experiences for all of his medical friends. And the bottom line, after 40 years of near-death experience research, he found out the mind is different from the brain. He believed this from a medical point of view. There are conjectures, but no standing theory explaining near-death experiences. We still don't understand. Is it a hallucinatory sort of thing, or is it a visit to the front porch of heaven? Here is a great, some of the statistics. 90% of people with near-death experiences have feelings of peace, 75% feelings of joy or bliss, 2/3 sensitive feeling of cosmic unity, 75% reported an encounter with a loving being of light, and 25% had this life review. The people that believe that the experience was real, not a dream, but real, was 95%. What they experienced was real. And there were a few that didn't. So that kind of concludes I noticed people leaving in the back, so that'll conclude my talk. Let me just kind of summarize where we've been. We're asking ourselves whether we are computers made out of meat. I made the case that there are advances in philosophy, neuroscience, and medicine that actually are supporting of the idea that the mind is greater than the body. We are more than computers made out of meat. And we've looked at the ideas of consciousness, we've looked at the aspects of neuroscience, abstract thought, and then last, near-death experiences. So that concludes it. Let me end with a Bible verse. It says, "O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory?" If indeed these near-death experiences are the front porch of heaven, we got nothing to worry about. And again, a lot of these people that have near-death experiences, they don't want to come back. They think I feel really great and I just don't want to return. So thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. And again, I'll pitch my book, Minding the Brain, and then my final famous slide. You think something's going to happen, it doesn't. Okay, thank you for your attention. Appreciate it.